The Dukascopy TV team once again brings you the week ahead, where we invite a guest to talk to us about several key data releases or events that could shake the markets from the week beginning Monday the 20th of August. Joining me today to talk about the possible disintegration of the eurozone, what we can expect from announcements from the ECB and the FED, and his projections for the eurodollar plus emerging currencies, is Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist and Director Efficient Group. Hello, Dawie. What do you think investors and market players should be keeping a close eye on next week?
I think the most important issue, or the most important piece of uncertainty on the financial markets at the moment, is what can be expected in terms of a change in economic policy, especially by the central banks. Now, what we have been getting the last couple of weeks is that economic data globally hasn't been very upbeat. In fact, some of the economic data suggests that some of the big economies globally are in a recession. And quite ironically, the worse the economic data, the better the financial markets are doing. And the reason for that has to do with the expectation that the worse the economic data is, the more likely central banks are to relax monetary policy further. So I think the most important thing is probably going to be whether central banks are going to make some sort of announcement in terms of perhaps a further round of bond purchasing by either the FED or the ECB, and I think that's part of the reason why the financial markets are quite upbeat this week.
In your view, Dawie, what are the chances of a possible disintegration of the eurozone?
I think chances certainly increase quite dramatically that the EC or the eurozone can disintegrate. Personally, I think the Germans wouldn't mind getting the Greeks out of the eurozone, but the risk that they're running in forcing the Greeks to exit the eurozone is quite high. For example, if there's a rumor going around that the Greeks are going to leave the euro area, there certainly will be a huge run on the banks in Greece. And of course, the next question will be who's going to be next. My suspicion is that will lead to a run on the banks in Spain, in an island, in Portugal, and maybe even on places like, for example, in Italy. So the real risk that the Germans are running is that if they allow for the exit of Greece in Europe, that can lead to a run on the banks, and eventually that can lead to a catastrophic collapse of the eurozone, and eventually that can lead to a global recession. And for that reason, I think the Germans and the politicians in Europe will do whatever they possibly can to prevent the Greeks from leaving the euro area. But I have to admit, I think chances increased quite dramatically the last 3 or 4 months for the possibility of the Greeks leaving the eurozone. But that can only happen if the euro or the Greek debt can be isolated and the Greek banks can be isolated to prevent them from having a knock-on effect or domino effect on the rest of the European financial sectors.
And who do you think will be next to seek a bailout? I
think the next country certainly that's going to ask for something will be Spain, but I think the ECB will try to disguise that and to make it look as if it is assistance to the banks in Spain and not necessarily for Spain as such.
And can you tell me, what are your opinions on ECB or FED policies?
I think the financial markets are doing well at the moment because of expectations that there could be further relaxation on monetary policy in ECB, in Europe or in the United States. I think chances are quite good that we're going to see something. I think expectations are so big already that the central banks have to do something. In the case of the United States, I don't think we're necessarily going to see a so-called QE3, but there could be some other measures, like, for example, a further reduction in interest rates, especially between banks, by the Federal Reserve, and there may be a kind of a quantitative easing a policy or further policy announcement by the Federal Reserve, but clearly there's a lot of political opposition to that. In the case of Europe, with interest rates currently at 0.75%, the ECB interest rates, I think there's a possibility that we will eventually see a further cut in interest rates in Europe, which not necessarily going to do that much to support the economies. The major issues in Europe and certainly in the United States is simply that they have this massive fiscal debt overhang, and that's going to take literally decades to work out of the way. So I'm afraid the European economies and the North American economies, particularly the United States, are probably not going to perform well economically for quite a long period of time.
What outlook do you have for the euro dollar and emerging currencies?
Well, whether we like the Americans or not, the US dollar is the world's currency. That is the most important reserve currency in the world. It is a currency that most central banks invest in. It is a currency in which all of us, or most international trade is conducted in. So the US dollar is a very important currency. But I'm afraid the US dollar, because of things like, for example, quantitative easing and a very, very relaxed and a very accommodative monetary policy, is eventually likely to lose a lot of its value. So in the short term, although everybody runs to the US dollar whenever they feel uncertain about what's going on globally, eventually what will happen is the US dollar will lose its dominance as the most important international currency, and they will have to start sharing that platform with currencies like, for example, the renminbi and the euro, and perhaps one or two other currencies as well. So in the short term, I expect the dollar to remain the safe haven for international capital flows, but over the longer term, inevitably the dollar will eventually depreciate, and things like, for example, the gold price will go up, commodity prices generally will go up, while I think other currencies like, for example, the renminbi and other emerging currencies will also gain against the US dollar. The question on the euro, of course, really depends on things like what's going to happen to Spain and what's going to happen to Greece. If there's a catastrophic collapse of the whole eurozone, then there wouldn't be a euro in a year or two's time. I don't think we're going to get to that. I think the euro will still be there, and I think eventually, once they've sorted out some of these issues, I think the euro will really be one of those currencies that will be seen as a rival to the US dollar as a reserve currency as well. But that's going to take some time. Clearly what is happening is that the Western economies are losing their economic and political dominance globally, and that this economic and political dominance is slowly shifting to the east.
Thank you for joining me today, Dawie. Well, that's all we've got time for right now, but stay tuned to Dukascopy TV for more interviews and updates. For now, though, goodbye.